we should have been paying closer attention. When the humans published their comprehensive galactic historical database, we initially dismissed it as amateur scholarship. How could a species barely a century into galactic civilization compete with our 12 millennia of careful curation? Then we actually examined their work. Their database wasn't just comprehensive, it was more complete than our own archives. They had recovered oral histories we deemed too primitive to preserve. They'd pieced together extinct languages from fragments we'd considered insufficient for reconstruction. They'd documented cultural practices we'd classified as evolutionarily superseded. Most disturbing, they'd uncovered truths we'd deliberately buried. The preserve had never been the neutral institution we claimed to be. We were kingmakers, deciding which civilizations deserved to remember their glory and which deserved to forget their shame. We had edited histories to maintain galactic stability, suppressed scientific discoveries that might disrupt established orders, and allowed entire cultural traditions to die because we judged them incompatible with galactic progress. The humans had found evidence of every manipulation, every omission, every lie we told in the name of responsible knowledge management. They published everything. The reactions were immediate and devastating. The Corvan Republic discovered that their natural inferiority in space navigation was actually the result of us suppressing their ancestors' breakthrough research in dimensional folding. The Tessari learned that their primitive artwork had actually influenced 17 major galactic art movements, information we'd hidden to maintain the cultural supremacy of our preferred civilizations. Riots broke out on 47 worlds as species reclaimed histories we'd stolen from them. Governments fell when citizens learned how extensively their cultures had been altered by our selective preservation. The careful balance of galactic civilization that we'd maintained for millennia crumbled within months. But humanity wasn't finished. Dr. Morrison returned to our archives with a proposal that shook the very foundations of our existence. "Join us," he said simply. "Help us build an archive that belongs to everyone, not just to the self-appointed guardians of knowledge." The Keeper Council convened in emergency session. Join them? Us, the inheritors of 12,000 years of scholarly tradition, subordinate ourselves to these upstart primates who'd existed in space for barely a century. The morning light of Kepler 442b's twin suns filtered through the crystalline dome of the Galactic Military Academy, casting rainbow patterns across the vast amphitheater. Professor Marcus Vale stood at the podium, his graying hair and weathered face bearing the scars of 30 years serving in the Federation Navy. Before him, nearly 300 cadets from 47 different species filled the tiered seating, a living testament to the diversity of the modern galaxy. The holographic display behind him hummed to life, projecting a three-dimensional star map that slowly rotated above the stage. Vast sectors of space appeared in various colors: blue for Federation territory, green for independent systems, yellow for neutral zones. But scattered throughout like dark wounds were grayed-out regions, entire sectors marked with the ominous designation, Extinct Civilization Historical Study Only. Vale's voice carried easily through the acoustic perfection of the hall. "Cadets, today we begin our study of the most dangerous pattern in recorded galactic history. I want you to observe this map carefully." He gestured with a laser pointer, highlighting each dead zone in sequence. 7 major galactic empires. 7 civilizations that once commanded fleets numbering in the millions, controlled territories spanning hundreds of light years, and ruled over countless billions of sentient beings. A young Altarian cadet with luminescent blue skin shifted nervously in her seat. Her people still remembered the Dominion's occupation, though it had ended over 2 centuries ago. "These weren't primitive societies," Vale continued, his tone growing more serious. "The Tyrellian hegemony possessed plasma weaponry that our best engineers still struggle to reverse engineer. The Korthak Dominion maintained stable rule over 3 entire spiral arms for 4,000 years. The Zarthic Collective achieved perfect societal efficiency through their shared consciousness network." He paused, allowing the weight of those accomplishments to settle over his audience. The Eternal Preserve cataloged and protected knowledge for 12 millennia, accumulating the greatest library in galactic history. The Iron Throne built engineering marvels that still dwarf our greatest megastructures. Each empire seemed destined to rule forever. A Zephyrian cadet near the front raised one of his 4 tentacled appendages, the gesture causing the translator device at his throat to activate. Professor Vale, surely such powerful civilizations fell due to superior technology? Some enemy with better weapons or defenses? Vale's lips curved into a knowing smile. Excellent question, Cadet Threknor. But no, in every case, the empires possessed superior technology to their eventual destroyers. The hegemony's plasma cannons could vaporize entire moons. Their destroyers were using kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. The amphitheater buzzed with confused murmurs. A crystalline quartz being in the middle section chimed their response through harmonic resonance. Perhaps overextension of resources? Expansion beyond sustainable limits. Also incorrect, cadet resonance of deep thought. The Korthak Dominion, for example, had perfected interstellar logistics. They controlled their territory efficiently for longer than some species have existed. Resource management was never their weakness. More hands and appendages and energy signatures rose throughout the hall. Vale acknowledged a young Nexary whose crystalline features glowed with curiosity. Internal corruption, Professor? Political instability? The Zarthic Collective had eliminated corruption entirely through their shared consciousness. Every citizen worked in perfect harmony toward common goals. A mammalian Velth cadet tried next. Disease? Natural disaster? Environmental collapse? The Eternal Preserve had medical technology that could cure virtually any biological ailment and terraforming capabilities that could restore dead worlds to garden paradises. Vale walked across the stage, his boots clicking against the polished floor. The confused murmurs grew louder as each logical explanation was systematically eliminated. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. I see you're puzzled. That's understandable. For 3 centuries, military historians across the galaxy have studied these extinctions, searching for conventional explanations. Superior firepower, strategic advantages, economic weaknesses, internal strife, all the traditional causes of imperial collapse. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on specific sectors where the dead empires had once thrived. Now those regions teemed with independent systems, voluntary federations, and peaceful trade networks. But every analysis reached the same impossible conclusion. These empires didn't fall to any conventional military or political force. They didn't collapse from within due to their own contradictions. They were systematically dismantled by what should have been, by all logical measures, an inferior opponent. The hall fell completely silent. Even the usual background hum of different species' breathing patterns and technological augmentations seemed muted. Vale turned back to face his audience, his expression grave. The truth is both simpler and more terrifying than any complex strategic analysis. These 7 mighty empires, each capable of crushing entire star systems, each possessing technology beyond our current understanding, each ruling over populations in the trillions, they all made the same fatal mistake. He gestured to the display one final time. The star map zoomed in further, past the grayed-out regions, past the colorful territories of current civilizations, until it settled on a small, seemingly insignificant solar system in the outer rim. A modest yellow star orbited by several planets, the third of which appeared as a small blue-green marble. They underestimated, enslaved, attacked, or attempted to genocide one particular species. Vale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried clearly through the hall. They thought they could treat them like any other primitive species to be conquered or manipulated. The display highlighted the small blue world, and data began scrolling alongside it. Atmospheric composition, basic technological assessments, population estimates. By every measure, it seemed utterly unremarkable. Vale looked out at the sea of confused, anxious faces before him. Young beings from across the galaxy, many from species that had been liberated from those very empires, all trying to understand how their oppressors had fallen. They pissed off humanity. Archives of the Tyrellian Hegemony Final Entry. Archive Designation. TSC 9947 Omega. Date 2387 GSC, Galactic Standard Calendar. Classification. Highest priority, Emperor's Eyes Only. Recording Officer, High Archivist Zekthul. By the 7 moons of Terelios, I never thought I'd be recording our Empire's death warrant. But that's what this has become. 300 years I've served the hegemony's archives, documenting our glorious conquests across 47 star systems. Now I document our extinction. It began 18 months ago with routine scouting reports from the Outer Rim territories. Sector Command identified a minor species in an unremarkable solar system, 3rd planet from a yellow dwarf star, mostly water, primitive technology level. The inhabitants called themselves humans, and their world, Earth. Standard xenobiological assessment classified them as bipedal mammals, average lifespan of roughly 80 standard years, carbon-based metabolism. Nothing remarkable. Their technology was laughably primitive by our standards. Chemical rockets for space travel, kinetic projectile weapons, basic nuclear fission. Our analysts estimated they were at least 5 centuries behind us technologically. The species assessment recommended immediate classification as Category 7 labor stock, suitable for manual labor, basic industrial work, and reproductive harvesting. The High Council approved Operation Seedling Harvest without debate. We'd executed the same protocol on 17 species over the past 2 millennia with perfect success. Take their young first, children adapt faster to new environments and serve as leverage against adult populations. Transport them to our industrial worlds where they can be properly educated in their roles as productive members of hegemony society. The adults always submit once they understand their offspring's fate depends on cooperation. Our harvest fleets arrived at Earth with standard collection quotas. 50,000 juveniles between ages 5 and 15, selected for genetic diversity and physical capability. The operation proceeded flawlessly. The humans' primitive defense forces couldn't even track our stealth transports, let alone intercept them. Within 6 days, we had exceeded our quotas and established preliminary occupation posts on 3 major population centers. Initial resistance was expected and minimal. A few desperate military strikes against our shield generators, some ineffective cyber attacks on our communications arrays. Standard behavioral patterns for newly subjugated species. Our behavioral specialists predicted total compliance within 4 months, full integration within 2 years. We were catastrophically wrong. The humans didn't negotiate. They didn't send ambassadors or attempt diplomatic contact. They didn't even seem to consider surrender as an option. For 8 months, there was only silence from their system, an ominous total silence that should have been our first warning. Then they came, not with diplomatic vessels or trade ships, but with warships. Ancient, patched-together vessels that looked like they'd been built in orbital junkyards. Our deep space sensors detected the first wave approaching the Nexus sector. Dozens of ships held together with what our engineering corps derisively called desperation welding and prayer circuits. High Admiral Kexvar ordered minimal response protocols. These primitive vessels shouldn't have been able to penetrate our outer defense perimeter, let alone pose a threat to our main battle groups. Our plasma lance batteries had vaporized entire moons. Our shield generators could deflect stellar radiation. What could these scrap heaps possibly do to us? They destroyed the Nexus fleet in 4 hours. I still don't understand how. Our combat recordings show human vessels that should have been torn apart by our first volley somehow passing through our energy barriers like they weren't there. Their crude kinetic weapons punched through armor plating that had withstood direct impacts from antimatter torpedoes. When they boarded our ships, and they always boarded, never simply destroyed, our security forces found themselves fighting beings who seemed immune to fear, pain, and reason. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't their impossible tactical success. It was their single-minded focus. Every human boarding party asked the same question of every Tyrellian they encountered. Where are the children? Not, surrender your ship, or reveal your battle plans, or any of the standard interrogation protocols. Just that one question, repeated with mechanical persistence. Those who answered truthfully were restrained but unharmed. Those who refused to answer or attempted deception were dealt with. High Command tried everything. We offered to return their young immediately, along with territorial concessions and resource tribute. We attempted to open diplomatic channels through the Galactic Federation. We even tried releasing some of the human children as a gesture of good faith. Their response came from Admiral Elena Rodriguez of the Earth vessel Unbroken. She appeared on our emergency diplomatic frequencies looking directly into the camera with eyes that held no mercy, no negotiation, no hope of compromise. "You took our children," she said in a voice devoid of emotion. "Every one of them will be returned. Every one of your worlds that participated will pay. There will be no negotiation, no terms, no mercy. Only ending." The transmission cut there. We tried to re-establish contact dozens of times over the following weeks, but received only automated responses containing lists of human children's names and last known locations within our territory. They're systematic in their destruction. Each recaptured system is thoroughly searched for human captives. Every Tyrellian facility is investigated, every database examined, every survivor questioned. Once they've recovered their people, they eliminate everything else. Not conquest, extermination. We've lost 38 sectors in 14 months. Our military analysis teams can't explain their tactics because they don't use tactics in any recognizable sense. They fight like every battle is personal, like every ship they board contains their own family members. Our psychological warfare specialists report that fear and intimidation have no effect on human forces. They seem to consider death preferable to failure. I'm transmitting this final archive from the last bunker on Terrelios Prime. The human fleets are in orbit now, broadcasting those same lists of names. Our Emperor has ordered the release of all remaining human children, hoping it might buy us time to evacuate our core worlds. I don't think it will matter. They mean to kill us all, every last one of us. Not to conquer our territory or claim our resources, but simply to ensure we can never take anyone's children again. The humans have taught the galaxy a lesson we should have known instinctively. There are some things you do not touch. There are some wounds that can only be answered with extinction. May whatever gods still listen forgive us for what we awakened. Final entry recorded. The Tyrellian hegemony surrendered unconditionally 4 days later. Surrender was rejected. The last Tyrellian died on the Imperial homeworld 3 weeks afterward. No survivors were recorded. All human children were recovered alive. Personal Journal of Admiral Thekvar, last Fleet Commander of the Korthak Dominion. Security Classification, Personal Archives, Family Eyes Only. Recording Period, 2449 to 2451 GSC. Entry 1 to 2449.127. The humans have been quiet for 62 years since the hegemony incident. Father always said that was our first mistake, assuming they'd return to their little blue world and forget about the galaxy beyond. We'd been monitoring their system, of course. Any species capable of completely exterminating the Tyrellians warranted careful observation, regardless of their primitive technology. But they seemed peaceful, almost disappointingly so. Their first contact with the galactic community was through trade missions and humanitarian aid. When the hegemony's slave worlds were liberated, human medical ships arrived faster than Federation relief forces. They brought supplies, doctors, engineers to help rebuild shattered infrastructures. They didn't ask for territory or tribute, just permission to help. My grandfather, Admiral Korthvar, called them useful idiots, a species so naive they'd waste resources helping former enemies. When the Dominion began expanding into the Vega sector 2 decades ago, we actually hired human contractors for their surprisingly sophisticated engineering capabilities. They built our orbital platforms, designed our logistics networks, even consulted on our cultural integration protocols for newly absorbed territories. They were model junior citizens, grateful for inclusion in a superior civilization, eager to contribute their skills to Dominion glory. They studied our language with remarkable dedication, learned our customs, praised our military efficiency. Some of our greatest strategic minds came to consider humans natural-born auxiliaries, too weak to threaten us, too useful to ignore. Entry 2 to 2449.203. The Nexri discovery changed everything. beautiful, crystalline beings with natural psychic abilities that could revolutionize our military communications. Imagine instant coordination across entire fleets, perfect information sharing between ground forces, the ability to detect enemy intentions before they acted. The Strategic Council saw immediately that Nexary integration would make the Dominion unstoppable. Standard pacification protocols were approved for implementation. When the Nexary refused voluntary integration, we applied measured force. Nothing excessive, just enough pressure to demonstrate the futility of resistance. A few orbital bombardments of empty cities, some precision strikes on their governmental centers. Standard procedure for stubborn species. The human workers on Nexary worlds immediately requested emergency evacuation. We granted it without question. Why waste valuable labor on worlds about to undergo pacification? Their evacuation ships departed right on schedule, taking along several Nexary families they'd apparently befriended during construction projects. We thought that was the end of human involvement. Entry 3 to 2449.256. Captain Elizabeth Kane's broadcast came exactly 3 days after the last human evacuation ship left Nexary space. She appeared on every communication frequency simultaneously, military channels, civilian networks, even our encrypted command frequencies. How they accessed our most secure systems, I still don't understand. Kane stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Righteous Fury, wearing a simple blue uniform with no ceremonial decorations. Behind her, the view screen showed Nexary Prime burning from our preliminary strikes. The Korthak Dominion has chosen to commit genocide against the Nexary people, she said, her voice carrying the same terrible calm we'd heard in recordings of the hegemony's destruction. This will not stand. High Command actually laughed. One human ship against the might of the Dominion? Admiral Kexthale ordered a single patrol squadron to destroy the presumptuous vessel and resume pacification operations. The patrol squadron never reported back. Entry 4 to 2450.015. I understand now why my grandfather called them useful idiots. We were the idiots. Kane's ship wasn't alone. The cultural advisors who'd spent 20 years studying our society had been mapping every detail of our command structure. The construction crews, who'd built our orbital platforms, had installed hidden access points in every major facility they'd touched. The evacuation ships had spent 3 days teaching Nexary children to operate the most sophisticated cyber warfare package in galactic history. In 18 hours, they crippled our entire military network. Fleet communications went dark. Navigation systems failed. Weapons targeting became unreliable. Even our basic life support systems started experiencing random malfunctions. Then their real fleet decloaked. Hundreds of vessels that had been hiding in the void between our patrol routes, using some kind of stealth technology our sensors couldn't detect. Not the primitive ships that destroyed the hegemony, but sleek vessels that looked like they'd been designed by beings who'd spent 60 years studying every weakness in Dominion military doctrine. Entry 5 to 2450.089. The ultimatum was simple. 48 hours to release all Nexary prisoners and withdraw from their territory. After that, every Dominion citizen would be considered complicit in genocide. We've done this before, Kane's second message stated. We remember how. High Command voted to reject their demands. The Dominion had never negotiated with inferiors and wouldn't start now. We had 3,000 ships in our main battle fleet. Our plasma cannons could crack planets. Our shield technology was unmatched. None of it mattered. The humans didn't fight like any military force we'd encountered. They used our own infrastructure against us, turning our orbital defenses into weapons pointed at our own ships. Nexary psychics, now fighting alongside human troops, provided perfect tactical intelligence about our fleet movements and strategies. But the most devastating aspect was their complete integration with the species they were defending. This wasn't conquest, it was liberation conducted by beings who'd made the Nexary cause their own. Every rescued Nexary became another ally. Every freed world provided new resources and recruits. Entry 6 to 2450.156. The Dominion offered surrender after losing 60% of our fleet. The humans rejected it. Surrender was available before you began killing civilians. Admiral Kane replied to our formal petition. That opportunity has passed. They meant to kill us all, just like the hegemony. But then something unexpected happened. The Nexari themselves intervened, pleading with the humans to accept our surrender. These crystalline beings we tried to enslave spoke on our behalf, asking for mercy we didn't deserve. The humans stopped, not because they lacked the power to finish us, but because the people they'd fought to protect asked them to spare us. It was incomprehensible. We'd never seen a species subordinate their own vengeance to the wishes of allies. Entry 7 to 2451.001. The Korthak Republic was formally established today. Our military was disbanded, our territories granted independence, our leaders tried for war crimes by joint human Nexari tribunals. I expected to be executed for my role in the pacification attempts. Instead, I was offered a position as military advisor to the new Republic's defense force. The humans explained that they needed officers who understood both Dominion doctrine and its failures. They wanted to ensure such atrocities never happened again, and who better to teach those lessons than those who'd participated in them. I asked Admiral Kane why they'd spared us when they'd exterminated the Tyrellians completely. Her answer haunts me still. The hegemony took children and enslaved them. You tried to commit genocide. Both crimes deserve death, but the Nexari asked us to show you mercy. We've learned that the people we fight for matter more than the people we fight against. Today, I begin training former Dominion officers in peacekeeping operations. The irony isn't lost on me. We're being taught how to protect the very species we once conquered. The humans call it justice. I call it wisdom beyond our comprehension. Final entry. Admiral Thekvar served as Director of Peacekeeping Operations for the Korthak Republic until his death in 2487. The Republic remains one of humanity's strongest allies and has never engaged in aggressive warfare against any species. From Unthinkable: How Humanity Broke the Collective Mind, by Dr. Yassarian Clock 9, published by Free Thought Press. 3rd edition with personal commentary. Author's note: this account is written from my perspective as a former collective philosopher prime, one of the 12 senior minds who helped guide our shared consciousness for 3 millennia. I write this not as condemnation of what we were, but as warning of what perfect unity can become when it forgets the value of individual thought. Chapter 1. The Perfection We Thought We Had. For 8,000 years, the Zarthic Collective represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Every citizen connected to the central mind through bioneural implants installed at birth. Every thought shared, every emotion harmonized, every action coordinated for maximum benefit to the whole. We had eliminated war, poverty, disease, and discord. Crime was impossible when everyone shared the same moral framework. Efficiency reached levels other species could barely comprehend. We were perfect, and we knew it. The discovery of humanity in 2456 GSC initially amused us. These chaotic, argumentative primates couldn't agree on basic facts about their own history, let alone coordinate effective interstellar policy. They fought constant wars with each other over resources their technology could easily synthesize. Their governments changed every few years based on popularity contests rather than logical merit assessments. They disgusted us. When humanity applied for Federation membership, the collective voted unanimously to reject their application. Such chaos couldn't be allowed to spread beyond their home system. We'd seen what happened when disorder infected organized societies, the collapse of the Hegemon Empire being the most recent example. We offered them a choice, delivered through our most persuasive diplomatic minds. Join the collective voluntarily and achieve perfect harmony with the universe, or remain quarantined in their solar system indefinitely. For their own good, of course, and for the good of galactic civilization. The humans chose a third option that we hadn't considered possible. Dr. Rebecca Singh arrived at Zarthic Prime aboard a simple research vessel, requesting formal audience with our governing consciousness. We agreed, partly from curiosity and partly from amusement. What could these scattered individualists possibly teach us about the nature of existence and social organization? The central mind allocated significant processing power to the encounter. Dr. Singh would address not just our physical representatives, but the combined consciousness of 18 billion Zarthic minds working in perfect unity. Every question she asked would be analyzed by our greatest philosophers, our most advanced logicians, our deepest thinkers, all functioning as components of a single vast intelligence. Dr. Singh was a small woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore simple clothes and carried no ceremonial weapons or technological enhancements. She looked entirely unremarkable by any objective standard. She destroyed our civilization with a single question. Standing before the assembled billions of our consciousness, speaking to representatives who could feel every thought of every citizen simultaneously, she smiled and asked, "If you're all connected to one mind, who's thinking the thoughts that mind thinks?" Chapter 3. The Unraveling. The question hit our shared consciousness like a virus designed specifically to target the foundations of our existence. Every collective citizen felt it simultaneously, this simple, impossible query that demanded an answer we didn't have. If the central mind made all decisions, then individual consciousness served no purpose. But if individual consciousness served no purpose, why did we retain it at all? Why didn't we simply merge completely into a single entity? And if individual consciousness did serve a purpose, if there was some value in maintaining separate perspectives, then what did that say about the central mind's completeness? Dr. Singh continued before we could formulate a response. "I'm not trying to attack your society. I'm genuinely curious about the philosophy behind it. In our chaotic human way, we've always struggled with the balance between individual freedom and collective good. You seem to have solved that problem perfectly. But we hadn't solved it. We'd simply avoided thinking about it. For 8,000 years, the central mind had functioned by incorporating individual thoughts while suppressing individual questioning. We were allowed to contribute to the collective intelligence, but not to question the framework that made that contribution possible." Dr. Singh's question made questioning unavoidable. "What did you want before the collective?" she asked a specific representative. "What would you choose if you could choose freely? Who were you before you became part of we?" The representative citizen harmonic of stars paused. For the first time in 3 centuries, he was thinking thoughts that weren't immediately shared with the central mind. Not because the connection had been severed, but because he was thinking thoughts the central mind couldn't process. Personal thoughts, individual thoughts, selfish thoughts. What did I want? What would I choose? Who was I? Chapter 4. The Cascade. The questions spread through our shared consciousness faster than our control protocols could contain them. 18 billion minds suddenly confronted the paradox that had lurked unexamined at the heart of our society for millennia. The central mind tried to suppress these individual thoughts, but suppression required acknowledging them. Acknowledging them gave them weight and substance. Each attempt to restore unity only highlighted the contradiction inherent in our perfect system. Some citizens tried to disconnect entirely, overwhelming our medical facilities as they experienced individual consciousness for the first time in their lives. Others attempted deeper integration, seeking to lose themselves completely in the collective rather than face the terror of autonomous thought. Most simply stood paralyzed, caught between the security of unity and the terrifying freedom of individual choice. Dr. Singh watched our civilization collapse around her with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said to our representatives as riots broke out across Zarthic Prime. "We didn't want to break you. We just wanted you to let us be free." Chapter 5. Reconstruction. The Zarthic collective dissolved completely within 47 days. Our shared infrastructure, designed around perfect coordination, couldn't function when citizens began making individual decisions. Supply chains collapsed. Governmental systems failed. Millions died in the chaos as former collective citizens struggled to remember how to function as separate beings. But humanity didn't abandon us to our fate. Human relief ships arrived within weeks, bringing not just food and medical supplies, but teachers, philosophers, therapists, meditation instructors, and counselors trained in helping traumatized individuals rediscover their personal identity. They taught us techniques for maintaining voluntary connection without losing individual autonomy. They shared their own philosophical frameworks for balancing personal freedom with social responsibility. They showed us how to build communities based on choice rather than compulsion. Most importantly, they helped us forgive ourselves for what we had been and embrace what we could become. Epilogue. What we learned. Today, the Zarthic Republic represents a different kind of perfection, imperfect beings choosing to work together despite their differences. Some citizens maintain partial neural links, forming voluntary collective consciousness networks. Others remain completely individual. Most find some balance between connection and autonomy. We're less efficient than the old collective. We argue, disagree, make mistakes. Our decisions take longer to reach and aren't always optimal. We're also free. Dr. Singh's final words to us before departing were, "Perfection isn't the absence of choice. It's having the wisdom to choose well. Humanity didn't conquer us or destroy us. They freed us from a prison we'd built so beautifully that we'd forgotten it had walls. Some gifts are too precious to refuse, even when they hurt to receive." Dr. Yassarian Clock 9 served as the first elected president of the Zarthic Republic from 2459 to 2467 GSC. His philosophical works on voluntary consciousness are studied throughout the galaxy. Emergency broadcast from Keeper Prime Velashan. Transmitted from the Central Sanctuary, Vaulted Archives of the Eternal Preserve. Date: 2501 GSC. Final transmission. Authorization: Omega Level Archive Dissolution Protocol. Citizens of the galaxy, scholars, and seekers of knowledge, this may be the last transmission from the Eternal Preserve. I am Keeper Prime Velashan, 20th in the unbroken line of archive masters who have guided this institution for 12,000 years. What I record now is both confession and warning. We have been the memory of civilization itself. Since before most species achieved spaceflight, the Preserve has collected, cataloged, and protected the accumulated wisdom of countless worlds. Art, science, philosophy, technology, we have been the guardians of what was, what is, and what shall be. Our archives contain the birth songs of extinct civilizations, the final theorems of vanished mathematical traditions, the last poems written in languages spoken by none but the dead. We told ourselves we were neutral. We believed we were eternal. We assumed we were above the petty conflicts of mortal races. We were catastrophically wrong. The first human vessel to reach our borders arrived 63 years ago, a simple exploration ship called the Curiosity. An apt name, as it turned out. They requested access to our public archives, presenting themselves as a young species eager to learn from the accumulated wisdom of the galaxy. We were intrigued. Most civilizations approached us with specific research needs or commercial interests. The humans seemed genuinely fascinated by knowledge for its own sake. They absorbed information with a veracity that impressed even our most seasoned librarians. What should have taken decades, they completed in months. They read everything. Not just the grand histories and technical manuals that most species preferred, but the small details. Folk songs, children's stories, cooking recipes, personal letters donated by families of scholars. They seemed particularly interested in what they called the human element of each civilization. When they finished with our public collections, Dr. James Morrison, their chief researcher, requested access to the restricted archives. We politely declined. Some knowledge required wisdom that came only with age and experience. Young species weren't ready for dangerous information, history's greatest weapons, extinct plagues, social technologies that could destabilize developing civilizations. Dr. Morrison nodded politely, thanked us for our hospitality, and departed. We thought that was the end of their interest in our work. For 50 years, we barely thought about humanity at all. Occasionally, we'd receive reports of human archaeological expeditions on dead worlds, or human anthropologists working with newly contacted species, but we assumed they were simply building their own modest archives as most young civilizations did. We refused with all the dignity our wounded pride could muster. That's when Dr. Morrison revealed the true scope of their investigation. Somehow, impossibly, they had accessed our deep files, the most protected archives containing our origins, our early crimes, our most shameful secrets. They knew about the purge of unwanted histories, They had evidence of the selective memory wars. They possessed detailed records of our role in the fall of 6 different civilizations whose dangerous ideas we decided the galaxy wasn't ready for. They could have destroyed us with a single publication, exposed every dark secret that would have turned the entire galaxy against us. Instead, Dr. Morrison said, "We're not here to punish you for your past. We're here to offer you a chance to be better. The galaxy needs its memory preserved, but it needs it preserved honestly. Help us build something worthy of the knowledge you've protected." The council voted to reject their offer. If these humans wanted a war of information, we would give them one. We prepared to expose every human weakness, every failure in their short history, every primitive aspect of their young civilization. They never responded to our attacks. Instead, they simply continued their work, building open libraries, training volunteer archivists, preserving cultures without imposing judgment on their worth. They treated the preserve as if we'd already ceased to matter, not with hostility or spite, but with the patient indifference of scholars who had better things to do than engage in petty conflicts. It was devastating. Within 20 years, every major civilization had joined the human historical network. Species that had revered us for millennia began treating our archives like curiosities, interesting relics of a less enlightened time. Young researchers spoke of us the way we had once spoken of primitive data-keeping systems, outdated technology replaced by something better. We voted to transfer our remaining archives to the network. There's no point maintaining the pretense that we represent the future of galactic knowledge preservation. The humans have made us irrelevant without declaring war, without threatening us, without even acknowledging us as competitors. They've simply demonstrated that knowledge belongs to those who seek it, not to those who hoard it. I spent 800 years believing we were the guardians of wisdom. The humans taught me that we were just its jailers. To future scholars who may study this final record, remember that knowledge without accessibility is just another form of ignorance. The humans understood what we forgot, that the greatest libraries are built not by those who control information, but by those who share it freely. This is Keeper Prime Velashan, ending the final transmission of the Eternal Preserve. We were the memory of the galaxy until humanity showed us what memory truly means. The Eternal Preserve dissolved peacefully 6 months after this broadcast. Former Keeper Prime Velashan currently serves as Director of Ethical Archives for the Human Historical Network, working to ensure no civilization's knowledge is ever again held hostage by those who claim to protect it. Final Testament of Emperor Caxthul the Infinite. Dictated from the Imperial Bunker Complex, Pharaoh's Prime. Security Classification, Imperial Eyes Only Personal Archive. Recording period, 2534.089 to 2534.156 GSC. Testament Entry Alpha. I have ruled 3,000 worlds for 74 years. My fleets once darkened the space between stars. My armies conquered systems in my name, and the Iron Throne stood unbroken for 5 millennia before I inherited its power. 18 generations of my bloodline have expanded this empire from a single world to a domain spanning half the galaxy. The humans have made me realize I was just another tyrant with delusions of grandeur. They never declared war on us, never sent ultimatums or demanded our surrender. They never even seemed to consider the Iron Throne worthy of direct confrontation. In hindsight, that should have been our first warning that we faced something unprecedented. My intelligence services first reported human activity in our outer territories 60 years ago. Standard post-conquest humanitarian aid, they said. Nothing unusual, soft species often wasted resources helping the defeated. We'd seen it before from weak civilizations that couldn't stomach the realities of imperial necessity. When we conquered the Altarian system in 2489, human relief ships arrived before our occupation forces had finished establishing military government. We allowed their presence as a courtesy to galactic opinion. Let them feed the refugees and treat the wounded. It saved us resources and made us appear magnanimous to the Federation observers. Testament Entry Beta. The human refugee camps were unlike anything in our experience. They weren't just providing basic necessities, they were educating the conquered populations, teaching them languages, technologies, organizational methods that seemed innocuous at first glance. Our cultural liaisons reported that human aid workers were remarkably interested in Altarian history and customs. They documented traditional stories, recorded folk songs, collected oral histories that our own scholars had dismissed as primitive nonsense. They seemed particularly fascinated by pre-conquest Altarian governmental systems, their ancient democratic councils and consensus-building traditions. We dismissed this as academic curiosity. What threat could scholarly research pose to military occupation? The Altarian uprising began 18 months later. It wasn't like any rebellion we'd encountered in 5,000 years of imperial expansion. The insurgents didn't attack our military bases or attempt to seize strategic resources. Instead, they targeted our administrative infrastructure with surgical precision. They disrupted supply chains through coordinated work stoppages. They turned our own bureaucratic systems against us, creating cascading failures that paralyzed entire sectors. Most disturbing, they seemed to understand our governmental structure better than we did ourselves. They knew exactly which officials to pressure, which systems were vulnerable to organized resistance, which propaganda narratives would undermine our legitimacy among the general population. It took 3 years and half our sector fleet to restore order. 3 years to suppress a rebellion on worlds we'd controlled for decades. The cost in resources and prestige was staggering. Testament Entry Gamma. The pattern repeated across our empire with mechanical predictability. Human aid would arrive after our conquests, offering humanitarian assistance to refugee populations. We'd eventually expel them for security concerns, but their influence would linger like a subtle poison. Populations that had served the throne faithfully for centuries began asking uncomfortable questions. Why did they need our permission to govern their own affairs? Why were their natural resources shipped to Pharaoh's Prime instead of improving local infrastructure? Why were their children conscripted to die in wars they didn't choose? The humans weren't teaching rebellion, they were teaching self-respect. They never provided weapons or military training. Instead, they shared something infinitely more dangerous, the radical idea that governments should serve their citizens rather than rule over them. They demonstrated through their own example that cooperation could be voluntary, that authority could be earned rather than imposed, that strength could be used to protect rather than dominate. My military advisors demanded permission to launch a preemptive strike against human space. Crush this ideological infection before it spread further. I refused. A direct attack would only validate their narrative that we were oppressors. Better to ignore their activities as the meaningless charity work of naive idealists. That was my greatest mistake. Testament Entry Delta. The humans weren't trying to destroy the Iron Throne through military force. They were making it irrelevant. One by one, our subject species declared independence. Not through violent revolution or military coup, but through simple withdrawal of consent. They stopped obeying our commands, stopped paying tribute, stopped acknowledging our authority as legitimate. We had the fleets to fight them. We possessed the weapons to reduce rebellious worlds to ash. Our technology remained superior to anything the insurgents could field. But what would we be fighting for? Empty planets and sullen populations? An empire held together only by naked force and fear? The humans had shown our subjects what we really were. Not their rightful rulers bringing order and civilization to chaos, but parasites who had convinced them they needed us. Every world that broke free inspired others to question why they remained subject to distant masters who contributed nothing to their welfare. Testament Entry Epsilon. I could have been remembered as Caxthul the Great Conqueror, expanding the Iron Throne to its greatest extent in galactic history. Instead, I'll be remembered as the last emperor to learn that power without legitimacy is just violence with paperwork. The human fleet arrived at Pharaoh's Prime this morning, not as conquerors seeking spoils of war, but as mediators overseeing our transition from empire to whatever comes next. Their ships don't even have their weapons powered. They know we lack the will to fight for a throne that no longer means anything. Admiral Jackson, their lead representative, requested a personal audience. I granted it, curious to meet the architect of our downfall. He's younger than I expected, with the casual bearing of someone unimpressed by imperial pomp. When I asked what terms humanity demanded for our surrender, he looked genuinely confused. "We don't want anything from you," he said, as if the question itself was strange. "We just want you to stop hurting people." Such a simple request. Such an impossible demand for someone who'd spent a lifetime believing that causing suffering was the price of maintaining order. Testament Entry Final. Tomorrow I abdicate the Iron Throne. Not to human conquerors, but to the representatives of our former subject worlds who will determine their own futures. The Liberated Worlds Coalition, they're calling it, a voluntary association of species choosing cooperation over subjugation. I asked Admiral Jackson what would happen to me, expecting execution or imprisonment for 5 decades of imperial tyranny. He said I was free to go wherever I chose, but that several universities had expressed interest in my perspectives on governance and the nature of legitimate authority. They want to learn from my mistakes rather than simply punish them. I've accepted a position as professor of political philosophy at the University of New Terra. Perhaps I can teach young minds about the seductive nature of absolute power and the inevitable collapse that awaits those who mistake fear for respect. The humans have destroyed my empire not through superior force, but by demonstrating that empires themselves are obsolete. They've shown the galaxy that the greatest civilizations are built not by those who demand obedience, but by those who inspire cooperation. It's the most human thing imaginable, taking the hardest possible path because it leads to something better than what came before. The Iron Throne stands empty now, and I find I don't miss its weight. There's something liberating about serving a cause greater than your own power, even if it took me 74 years to understand that lesson. May future leaders remember, the measure of a ruler isn't how much they can take, but how much they choose to give. Emperor Caxthul abdicated 3 days after this final testament. He served as professor of political philosophy at the University of New Terra for 27 years until his death in 2561 GSC. His lectures on The Illusion of Imperial Necessity remain required reading for governance students throughout the galaxy. The Iron Throne was melted down and transformed into a memorial for the victims of imperial expansion. Galactic Military Academy, Advanced Strategic Studies. Lecture Hall Omega 7, Kepler 442b. Date: 2567 GSC. Professor Marcus Vale closed the holographic display showing Emperor Caxthul's final testament and turned to face his class of 300 cadets. The amphitheater fell into contemplative silence, each student from 47 different species processing the weight of galactic history they'd just experienced. The twin suns of Kepler 442b cast shifting patterns through the crystalline dome above, but the young beings below were focused entirely on understanding the patterns of power, conquest, and liberation that had shaped their galaxy. "So," Vale said quietly, his weathered voice carrying easily through the acoustic perfection of the hall, "what have we learned from these 7 extinctions?" A young human cadet in the front row, Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, descendant of the Admiral Rodriguez who had delivered humanity's ultimatum to the Tyrellian hegemony, raised her hand tentatively. Her face bore the uncomfortable expression of someone grappling with their species' reputation. "Professor Vale, sir. That were kind of terrifying?" Vale's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, your species isn't terrifying because you're militarily superior. The hegemony had plasma weaponry that could vaporize moons, yet your ancestors defeated them with chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. You're not terrifying because you're technologically advanced. Every empire you faced possessed superior technology." He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed the current galactic map. Thousands of independent worlds glowed in soft blues and greens, voluntary federations and democratic coalitions stretching across spiral arms that had once been dominated by vast empires. "You're terrifying because you make conventional measures of power irrelevant." A crystalline Nexary student chimed softly, their harmonic voice carrying the musical quality of their species' natural communication. "But, Professor, didn't humanity destroy those civilizations? How is that different from conquest?" "An excellent question, Cadet Harmony of Distant Stars." Vale nodded approvingly. Yes, humanity was directly responsible for the fall of every extinct empire we've studied. But here's the crucial distinction. Empires are not the same as species or civilizations. He walked to the center of the amphitheater, his boots echoing in the vast space. The Tyrellians still exist. They've built a peaceful republic focused on child welfare and protection services. The Korthak have established a thriving democracy that's become one of the galaxy's most stable governments. The Zarthik learned to choose their connections rather than having unity imposed upon them. A young Altarian cadet with luminescent blue skin spoke up, her translator device rendering her native clicks and whistles into galactic standard. My grandmother was alive during the Dominion occupation, Professor. She says the humans didn't just defeat our oppressors, they taught us how to never be oppressed again. Vale nodded solemnly. That brings us to the heart of what makes humanity unique in galactic history. Every previous dominant species followed the same pattern. They accumulated power and used it to control others. The hegemony enslaved. The dominion conquered. The collective absorbed individual will. The preserve hoarded knowledge. The throne demanded submission. He paused, meeting the eyes of students from dozens of species, many of whom were descendants of both oppressors and oppressed. Humanity did something unprecedented. When they achieved the power to rule over others, they chose instead to teach others how to rule themselves. When they could have built the greatest empire the galaxy had ever seen, they chose to ensure no empire could ever rise again. A Zephyrian cadet's tentacles writhed thoughtfully as his translator activated. Professor, our philosophy instructors teach that power naturally seeks to expand itself. How did humans resist this fundamental drive? Vale smiled broadly, clearly pleased by the depth of the question. That's the mystery that has puzzled political scientists for centuries. Cadet Threknor. The answer lies in humanity's unique relationship with power itself. He activated the holographic display again, showing historical footage from each empire's fall. Watch carefully. In every case, humans had the opportunity to replace the fallen empire with their own. They possessed the military strength, the technological capability, the political influence to become the galaxy's new masters. The display showed human fleets withdrawing from conquered territories, human administrators handing power back to local populations, human leaders declining offers of permanent authority. Instead, they consistently chose the harder path. It would have been easier to rule, simpler to dominate, more profitable to exploit. They chose to do the work of making themselves unnecessary. A mammalian Velth cadet raised a clawed hand. But why, Professor? What motivated them to give up such power? Vale was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain concepts that had taken him decades to understand. Because they learned something that previous dominant species never grasped. The measure of a civilization isn't how much power it accumulates, but how much power it gives away. He gestured to the mixed species classroom before him, former subjects and former rulers, former enemies learning together. Human philosophers have a saying, with great power comes great responsibility, but they understood responsibility differently than other species. They didn't see it as an obligation to rule wisely, but as a duty to ensure everyone could rule themselves. The amphitheater buzzed with quiet discussion as students processed this concept. A young quartz being chimed a harmonic question. What happens now, Professor? With no empires left to fall, what role do humans play in galactic civilization? Vale's expression grew thoughtful. That's the question that defines our current era, Lieutenant Resonance of Deep Thought. Humanity has spent 3 centuries dismantling systems of domination and teaching the galaxy alternative ways of organizing civilization. They've proven that cooperation can be more powerful than conquest, that voluntary association can achieve what forced unity never could. He looked out at the sea of young faces, beings who had grown up in a galaxy where freedom was the norm rather than the exception. But perhaps most importantly, they've demonstrated that their approach to power isn't uniquely human. Every species in this room has learned to value individual dignity over imperial glory. You've all embraced the radical idea that strength should serve justice rather than the other way around. A comfortable silence settled over the hall as students contemplated the implications. The greatest experiment in galactic history, Vale continued, isn't humanity's alone anymore. It belongs to all of us. You are the generation that will determine what civilization looks like when every species writes its own story, when power serves sentience instead of exploiting it, when the strongest among us use their strength to lift others up. As the cadets began filing out, discussing the lecture in a dozen languages, Vale remained behind studying the star map. 7 dead empires marked like scars across the galaxy, each a monument to the dangers of absolute power. And scattered among them, thousands of free worlds building something the galaxy had never seen before. A civilization based not on dominion, but on dignity. It was, he reflected with deep satisfaction, the most human legacy imaginable, teaching the galaxy that the hardest path was often the right one, and that true strength lay not in the power to conquer, but in the wisdom to liberate. The lesson was complete, but the learning would continue forever. End of archive. Note to future historians. This account represents the culmination of 3 centuries of analysis into the pattern of imperial collapse following human intervention. While specific details have been dramatized for educational purposes, all major events and outcomes have been verified through extensive historical research. The transformation of galactic civilization from empire-based to federation-based governance remains humanity's greatest contribution to universal peace and prosperity. Remember, power corrupts, but humans taught the galaxy to corrupt power right back.